I put my hand in my pocket, and I thought this woman was an Italian woman. She was vulnerable, right? I think that she would go for the okie doke, but she laughed at me, knowing that I only had a finger in there. I was scared, but all of a sudden, two Italian guys come around. Turned out to be mafiosos, Luigi and whoever. And well, I was trying to run out, they jumped on me, they grabbed me, they kicked me around a bit, they pulled me back in, and then they said, why'd you do it? And I told them, well, no place to stay, hungry, cold, you know, like most urban Indians, you know, got no place, got no job, got no money, can't pay no rent, you know, and a lot of people end up in the street. I was one of those urban Indians that was in the street for the only year of my life up at that time that I was free, with no skills. So anyways, thinking I was going to get probation, I ended up going to jail and given 8 years for a submarine sandwich. So I went to jail, and while I was in there, I told about all the different jails and the prison I was in, which was a number of them. But I was eventually sent to a prison called Attica State Prison, and as a result of a number of incidents that happened over the years, they killed some black revolutionary by the name of George Jackson, and we sort of responded by holding a ceremony on his behalf. And before you know it, there was a whole element of people coming from the street that were involved in the anti-war movement. People were becoming very conscientious. The Black Panther Party, the BLA, the Puerto Rican Liberation Army, the American Indian movement was just starting to stir from ex-cons from the joint, mobilizing in Minneapolis, Minnesota, the women's rights movement, the women of all red nations. People were beginning, really beginning to look at programs like J. Edgar Hoover's counterintelligence programs, and they would send it to different organizations to do what they call disrupt, discredit, and neutralize, a campaign to break up the unity of the organizing that was going on in all different peoples against the abuse of power by the governments. Long and short, I was 19 years old. Younger than some of the guys that are being here tonight. I was 19 years old. And at that time, for my attempt at robbery and got a submarine sandwich. And for that time, here I'm doing 8 years, trying to ward off the sexual abuse and the beatings by the prison guards. And watching prison guards running a rigid, terrible regime, terrorist regime is what I say, it was real terrorism. And in these places, watching people being, anytime you show opposition, being bludgeoned, beaten to death and bludgeoned to death, and just pulled right out of the prison, right now. And I saw 10 people on it for that time. And I admit to you, I was scared. But everybody had to try to fight the fear, because this was just like an all-white administration. Enough is enough. And so all of a sudden, we rose up, an incident happened, we took control of the prison. In the process of taking control of the prison, we were shaking this iron gate to get to these other quarters. And while we shook the gate busted and broke down a brick wall. The gate went down and hit some guard that was in there in the head. And because I'm the one that turned around, take this prison, I was charged with killing this cop, which I never did. He died because he got hit in the head, and everybody, 1,200 men, overrun this guy in the hallways. We held hostages for 5 days, and we were trying to change the fact that the prison was only paying us 2 cents a day, while they were making millions of dollars of profits off of our slave labor in sweatshops. Today, even Fortune 500 would tell you that the #1 industry in the country, in the U.S., is the prison industry, and that is where you invest your money for stocks, because you're assured to make a lot of money because prisons tend to double. At that time, there were 750 people in prison. Now, today, there's 2 million people in the United States in jail, with more people being executed than anywhere around the world, and more people in jail than any place around the world, and that is expected to double within the next 10 years. So, invest. Invest or divest. So, in any event, I am charged at the age of 19 with allegedly killing this cop, which I did. We held the place for 5 days. People like William Kunstler, and the civil rights attorney, and Bobby Seals come in, and Black Panthers, and a whole number of people from the New York Times editorialist, Tom Wicker, who eventually would write a book called The Time to Die, which became a movie starring Samuel L. Jackson and what's his name, Morgan Freeman, in the movies about Attica. The point of the matter is, the long and short is, we were trying to negotiate 20 demands for reform in there. As a matter of fact, some of us said, well, hey, this guard dies 2 days later. We want amnesty from any criminal prosecution. On top of that, some of us even then said, we want to get the helicopters, pull us out of there, and take us into a third world country, a non-imperialistic country. 17 countries in the world said that they would take us. It's incredible. And the reason that they were able to see this is because we had the media inside of the jail, and inside the prison. We had NBC, CBS, and ABC, and a number of other different media outlets. And for the first time in history, people were able to see what was really going on behind prisons. At the same time, Nelson Rockefeller, who was the governor, decided he was going to send in 1,000 state troopers. That same morning, and for the month before that, there had been a major standoff that happened with the Onondaga Indian Territory nation in Nedrow, New York, where 800 Mohawk peoples, my relations from the different nations, came to defend the Onondagas against the state of New York expanding the highway through their territory, violating the sovereignty clause, the sovereignty of the Onondaga nations, and the Mohawk came there armed to defend. Nelson Rockefeller sent them up there to get the Mohawks on September 13, 1971, but halfway up there turned them around and sent them into Attica for us, who basically had sticks and knives. When they came in, they came over and the helicopter flew over the prison, and somebody on there said, put your hands on top of your head, surrender to an officer, and you won't be harmed. They dropped canisters of CN4 gas, which was banned by the Geneva Convention of 1906. And 5 cans dropped down, gassed and maced everybody, terrible. And all of a sudden, there's 1,000 troopers on top of the building in fluorescent raincoats, red, with gas masks, and they shot 40,000 rounds of bullets into the yard, killing 43 people, including 11 of their own, and wounding and maiming over 80 people for life. And I had ran out of this cloud of gas right into a state trooper's gun. He pulled the trigger, the gun jammed, and the clip fell out.
Ah, praise the Lord.
And passed the ammunition. Now, okay, so now for me, it wasn't my day to go, obviously. So they throw me over this 30-foot wall, and I fall down, hit the ground, and all of a sudden I break my leg and I sprain my back, such a severe crack on my spinal column. And then I hit my head and passed out. And at that moment, I hit my head and passed out. I looked, my spirit left the body, and I'm watching everything happen from the spirit, and I'm looking at my own body. Then all of a sudden, it was just like, swap! I went right back into my body. And when I came in, all of a sudden, this guard, the state troopers got the gun, crow, nigger, crow! With a gun right in my face. Well, everybody that morning was called a nigger, didn't even care what color you were. And so, he couldn't move without I had broke. He started beating up on me some more. Long and short, the New York State troopers took people out of the cells that were rehousing and executed people all night long. There was a grand jury that came up, it indicted 61 of us, and we were called the Attica Brothers. And then they had a second grand jury to indict all the state troopers and guards that used the guns from their own house and to be taken to the prison in the massacre. And then they were going to indict these guards. But then Nelson Rockefeller was facing confirmation hearings as Vice President of the United States in 1974 under Gerald Ford. And Rockefeller got a hold of the head of the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, a guy by the name of Anthony B. Simonetti, and asked him to suppress any evidence of the killings that were done by the state troopers. And jury tampering is what he did. They suppressed that information. This guy by the name of Malcolm Bell said, he was a prosecutor. He said, I'm not going for that. He wrote a 60-page report, submitted it to the New York Times, and all of a sudden there was this major scandal. that came out. They sat on that article for 2 months until I got convicted. I was the only person ever convicted. New York Newsweek magazine says, unlike most murder trials, the Hill murder trial at Attica was completely bereft of evidence. The men had no evidence. This is a mainstream publication, Newsweek, saying had no evidence. This kid's a scapegoat, is what they were saying. Which is what? Now they never indicted it. They created a big scandal. Long and short, eventually the seceding governor, Hugh Carey, had to say, hey, we're going to close the books on Attica. They granted the state police a blanket amnesty from any criminal prosecution, which is exactly what they wanted anyways. Then all the rest of the men that were indicted, called the Attica brothers, there's the other 60 brothers, they were just completely exonerated. They had never went to trial. I'm the only one now that's in jail 5 years as a result of that, with 7 attempts, I say, to kill me in the book. And I maintained the spiritual power to stay alive. And then I was granted an executive clemency, which meant on the strength of the governor's recommendation, I'd go to the parole board and I should have been released. Well, there was a major threat for a national police strike across the country if I was to be released. And a state assemblyman and a senator by the name of Dale Volcker and Ralph Marino petitioned and threatened the acting chairman of the parole board, a guy by the name of Edward Hammack, confirmation in the Senate as the chairman of the parole board if I was to be released. I was, for the first time in the history of New York, on the strength of the governor's recommendation for release, given 2 more years. The international media by this time eventually called me the lone scapegoat of Attica, and eventually Ramsey Clark, the former U.S. Attorney General, was able to get me out the next 2 years, and then everything else was to fill out in there. Okay, so that I just highlighted that. It's all in there. Now, what I want to tell you is the part you've all been anxiously waiting for. It's the secret of the self. And this is true. This is real. I want to say that what's in this book, to me, is something that I have to share with every human being out here, regardless of color or gender. Because it is a secret that each and every one of us was guaranteed by creation. But like I say in the book, I believe that we've all been deceived by powers that be. The greatest crime that has been perpetuated on humanity by the church and the state is how they have stolen our soul and realization of who we really are as a people. The nature of the spirit, the nature of our own true selves, who we are, what is God or goddess, and why are we here? It's called the identity question. In each and every one of our lives, we will come to a point, we will ask ourselves in our maturity, who are we, what are we, who am I, what is God or goddess, and why am I here? And it's a global identity crisis that exists all around the world. Every human being has got it, and if nobody's asking that question, it's because they're so blindsided with so many illusions about the world that they're not even questioning who they are. But I believe we live in a time where we have to answer that. And that has always been the greatest philosophical question for any philosopher throughout time. The greatest philosophers try to answer that. Prophets throughout time have answered this question in the form of allegories, metaphors, mytho-poetic prose, and the works. I'm giving it to you in New York lingo. Penitentiary rap. Indigenous expression, if you will. In the human body, there are 7 nerve centers. If you took a microscope and you looked inside the human body, you'll see 7 tiny microscopic holes in your cerebrospinal, from the base of your spine to the top of your head. At some